they in a lot of different sentences.
I'm not sure it's TikTok. It was either TikTok or one of the other very popular amongst kids social media sites.
Oh, I finally got it.
All right, we'll be quiet.
Right, sorry. When you don't do this every day. All right, so there we go. We are definitely live streamed. Okay, all right. Finally, sorry for the delay, everyone. We are live. Technical difficulties. So let me just get my stuff ready here. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vintage Computer Federation's YouTube channel. My name is Jeff Brace, Vice President of the Vintage Computer Federation and showrunner for VCF East. Today's talk has 4 early pioneers in educating with computer technology. The first I will introduce is Liza Loop. She's been at the forefront of integrating technology in the classroom long before it became the norm. For 60 years, Liza Loop's focus has been on how to support learning for people and organizations. She was introduced to computing as a child and became immersed in the uses of computers for education as the personal computer revolution began in the early 70s. Since then, she has introduced thousands of children and adults to their computing experience. She has written end-user documentation, developed curriculum for schools, clubs, and museums, as well as conducting research. She founded the nonprofit Loop Center in 1975 to host a storefront computing center and to incubate related projects, including the History of Computing in Learning and Education Virtual Museum in 2001. Her recent futuristic endeavors are Kepler. Is that how I pronounce it? Kepler?
Sure, that's great.
Kepler, knowledge-based environment for personalized learning using an artificially intelligent recommender, an open portal network, an online forum for alternate and expanded education advocates. Sound good, Liza?
I don't think I need to say anything more. You just said it.
All right, welcome. And we also are joined by Cynthia Solomon. She's been focused on creating expressive learning environments for children. Her collaboration with Seymour Papert resulted in Logo, the first programming language designed specifically for children. Her 1971 paper with Seymour Papert, 20 Things to Do with a Computer, contained a rich assortment of computer-based projects. Recently, she co-edited a book of essays on children's learning and schooling by Marvin Minsky called Inventive Minds. Her current activities focus on Turtle Stitch, a way of applying turtle geometry and graphics and creating designs for a computerized embroidery machine. In 2016, she was awarded both the National Center for Women in Information Technology Pioneer Award and the Constructionism Lifetime Achievement Award. She is also the recipient of the 2019 FabLearn Lifetime Achievement Award. All right. Does that sound good, Cynthia?
Fine.
All right. All right. So, and we have Brian Silverman. He's been at the epicenter of creating innovative, playful, and educational software experiences for decades. He is also an undergraduate student at the time when Cynthia Solomon, Seymour Papert, Marvin Minsky were working on Logo. Since the 1970s, Brian Silverman has been involved in the invention of learning environments for children. His work includes dozens of Logo versions, including Logo Writer and MicroWorlds, Scratch, Lego Robotics, Turtle Art, the Pico Cricket, and the Phantom Fish Tank. Brian has been a visiting scientist at the MIT Media Lab, enjoys recreational math, and is a computer scientist and master tinkerer. Even once built a tic-tac-toe playing computer out of Tinker Toys. Sound correct?
Yes.
All right. And finally, we have Margaret. She is a technical editor and writer for Run Magazine. She was also the education writer for Link Up Magazine, which focused on telecommunications. She was the director of education centers on QLink, CompuServe, and Genie. Prior to that, she was an English teacher at the Naval Academy Prep School in Newport, Rhode Island, and was the head of the Computing Learning Lab at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Margaret is the founder and director of the Computer Assisted Learning Center, CALC, an online school that's been in operation since 1986 and is known as Cal Campus. She is the author of the Vintage Commodore 128 Personal Computer Handbook and co-author of Back into the Storm, with Commodore 128 2128 designer Bill Hurd. All right, welcome everyone. That's a lot of stuff, but I want everyone to sort of know your backgrounds. All right, so welcome Liza, welcome Margaret and Cynthia and Brian. So now we will proceed to some questions to the panelists. And I just want to make sure I have in the background in case we want to get to questions later on. So the first question is, we'll start with Liza. What initially sparked your interest in integrating computers in education?
Okay, it's storytelling time. And before I respond to that, I just wanted to mention that part of my motivation for participating in this event was so that those of us on the quote panel get a chance to talk to each other. So I don't want to do too much lecturing, or I certainly don't have a prepared speech. We wanted to talk with each other and let the rest of any of you listen in and join in as you wanted to. In terms of what got me excited about computing, I was actually at Sonoma State College in Northern California. My youngest son, I have two sons, was 5 months old. And I knew he was going to be a rebel, because if he wasn't a rebel on his own, I would probably make him into a rebel and make him have trouble in school. So I thought I better learn something about school. And so I took an extension course at Sonoma State in Montessori education, because I'd heard about Montessori and I thought that was a good approach. And the teacher for that course, that college extension course, was the head of a pre-K through probably 5 Montessori school, Maria Montessori at the Golden Gate in San Francisco. And for the first 3 sessions, these were 3-hour sessions once a week, she said, well, wait till Dr. Brown gets here. He's wonderful. So of course we waited till Dr. Brown got here. He was co-teaching the course. He had the kids in the Montessori school programming on a teletype in the pilot text language. The older kids were programming their Montessori lessons so the younger kids could use them as computer games. And that was 1972. It was actually 1971. And I spent 5 minutes listening to Dean Brown talk about what he was doing and why he was doing it, and said, that's my career, that's where I'm going. I knew nothing about computers, although my father was involved in computing, and I grew up in a scientific household. I really didn't know anything about computing. And 2 years later, I said, Dean, I want to start a public access computer center, and will you help me do it? He said, sure. So that's the story of how I got started. Dean is no longer with us, but it was 5 minutes that totally shook my world and changed my life. Did that answer your question? You're muted, Jeff.
Sorry, I have a tendency to mute so that it doesn't have extra background. Yes, that answers my question. Anybody have any comments on that? All right, so we'll go to the next person. So Cynthia, what initially sparked your interest in integrating computers into education?
Well, I want to situate it a little, because I did start thinking about computers and children in the mid 60s. I learned about computers and I started learning to program in the early 60s. I was fortunate. I had graduated college not knowing what to do. And eventually I said to a friend of mine, I want to learn to program. And she said, well, I've got this friend. He's at MIT and he's always looking for a secretary. So here's this college graduate. I became Marvin Minsky's secretary. And that began my world of learning about computers. So I was steeped in how do you think about making machines think, and how do you think about how people learn? And so that was in 1962. And by the mid 60s, now this was time sharing. And I think that makes a difference. And Liza must have been talking about setting up a time sharing environment for a drop-in center, because there weren't any personal computers. And I think that makes a difference. Anyway, I was involved both as a programmer and as an observer of children learning, until Seymour Papert had the brilliant idea that what we need to do is design a programming language for children. At that time, BASIC was, there were 14 primitives to BASIC. When it started, it was a very primitive language, and not very, as Seymour would say, teaching children about, say, algebra. This is where we saw a lot of learning with computers. Teaching children about algebra, having them use an algebraic programming language seemed a bit absurd. So Logo was based on the AI programming language called Lisp, and where Logo, it was a procedural programming language. You could have words of any length be names of inputs, names of procedures, and we thought that was pretty important. And you could write your own primitives. That was very important. In fact, the initial version of Logo had add and subtract. If you want to multiply and divide, you had to write those as primitives, as procedures. Of course, we changed that. Anyway, that's the first experience I had was Seymour Papert and I team taught a group of 7th graders in place of their math class. We taught them a Logo math class, and these were 7th graders because NSF wouldn't support us working with 5th graders, which is the group we wanted to work with. In fact, we had teletypes, time shared, etc. That was 68, 69 with Wally Feuerzig at Bolt Beranek Newman. Seymour and I left Bolt Beranek Newman after the project. In the spring of 1969, Seymour said, "This is all very well, but we need something more concrete." And that's how turtles came to be. Turtles were creatures that you could tell to go forward, back, left, or right.
Yeah.
And they eventually, when we went to MIT, they were implemented on a display as well as little robotic tethered creatures.
Physical, mechanical robots, yes.
Yeah, we didn't think of them as robots because robots were the things that Minsky and Papert worked on. They weren't this absolutely brainless creature, you see. It was just a thing you could control from your computer or from the time-shared computer. Anyway, in 1970, 71, Seymour and I team taught again 5th graders. And this time we had 2 floor turtles, display turtle, and so on, all going back over telephone lines to a computer at MIT.
Was this one of the computers? Do you see this on the screen?
No, that's very modern.
What about this one?
No, it looks more like it. isn't that the British one?
Yeah, that's the Valiant one from.
That's Valiant, and that's later too.
Oh,
And that one is also Valiant, I think.
all right. It looks very similar to the ones that you had created.
Oh, well, I could pull out a picture, but it is similar because they were something under a plastic dome. But later, and that's where Brian can tell you, in the 80s, different things were developed, but this is in the 70s. So that was how I got involved.
All right. Somebody's doing a Zoom thing here.
Let's see, turn screen sharing off.
All right, I think I done that. Okay.
Now, see, Gloria's another friend of mine. That's Marvin Minsky's
Okay.
wife.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I could see my name on a panel, but it
See, I gave her the same. You didn't give me good instructions.
All right, so let's do the same question to Brian. What initially sparked your interest in integrating computers in education?
Well, Cynthia brought the story up to 1972. What happened between 72 and 74 was the systems that Cynthia and Seymour were building for experiments got more and more sophisticated. And in 74, I arrived down at MIT. And one of the things that the Logo Group did is only some of the time was being used in actual experiments with actual kids. And the rest of the time, it was just open for any undergraduates that wandered by. And some of my friends were working at the labs. It was free access to computers, which now seems like it's not a big thing. But back in 1974, to be actually able to type at a computer by yourself. And it was a computer with a good programming language that Cynthia and Seymour developed with good graphic systems, various people there that did it. So my first experience really with all of this was kind of as just one of the kids that wandered by. And as the years clicked by, I got pulled into not only being one of the kids to play with it, but being one of the developers. And when it came time for Logo to escape the lab, we started a company called Logo Computer Systems and made versions of Logo for lots and lots of different early 80s computers. And the joke at that point was we talked to 100 different companies, each of which was going to get a 10% market share. And it didn't quite work out that way, but we did versions for Apple and for IBM. And then Logo kind of escaped the lab. And I think with the other questions, we can end up talking more about that.
Yes, I was part of development of reprogramming Logo for the Apple.
Mhm.
It became the Apple logo, and that crew, this was in 1980, right? 80, 81.
80, 81, 82.
Well, 82, I left, and Alan Kay set me up as director of a research lab for Atari. And where our mission, the people that joined me there had worked with me at Logo Computer Systems. And prior to that, they had been worked at the MIT Logo Group. So the nice thing was there were a group of us that had shared background, shared philosophy of education, and it made our developing stuff easy. But the lab only lasted 2.5 years, and then Atari was sold. But we did a lot of interesting things. And some of the things we did went to the Media Lab, which got formed in 1982, and Atari collapsed in 84. So our students, three of our people became the first Media Lab students. So sorry, Brian.
It's okay. You want to sort of like add to it. So let's go to Margaret now. what initially sparked your interest in integrating computers into education?
Okay, well, first of all, I started off not knowing anything about computers, and I really wasn't interested in them. I was trained as an English teacher, and I had just come out of the Navy. I taught at the Naval Academy Prep School. This was in the late 70s. So in the early 80s, I started looking for teaching jobs. And one of the jobs that I got was at Fitchburg State College, teaching English. And as part of my tasks there, one of them was to work in their Writing Skills Center, which was a remedial center for the students who needed to work on their grammar and basic writing skills. And in that lab, they had computers.
Oh.
So I was able to right there see how that school was using computers in education. And I was intrigued with that. Also around that time, I got a DEC Rainbow, which actually I got through my mother, who was an employee of DEC. And I started working with that. And I was also familiar a little bit with an Atari 800, which was my nephew introduced me to that. He was 15 at the time. So by the time we get to 1982, I was working with computers, word processing, and a little bit of basic programming. I started to work at the Fort Devens Learning Center. And in part of their learning center, they had a computer lab, which I ended up being the supervisor of. I was running that lab. And we had Apple computers. And so we were teaching basic programming and word processing, a little bit of vocabulary development. So putting all of that together, I could see that computers were useful for education, and I had a teaching background. So that's what kind of like brought me together with the computers at that time. Then by the time we got up to 1984, I left those jobs and I went to work for Run Magazine. And as part of my work there, I started to learn about telecommunications. And that's what actually led to my career, which I still am doing now, which is using computers through the online medium for teaching. And I started a school, which I'm still running, called Cal Campus. So that's how that worked.
Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret. So Liza put into the chat, so maybe I'll add this. So this is sort of, I'll read it to you. She says she's really interested in how we should be introducing little kids into computing today. So it's one thing when you did it years ago, everything was new, it was exciting. But now we have children that, they were born into this environment, and now they have much more advanced computers. She says the context has changed because many, if not most families, expose their children to smartphones. I've seen this before where the mother will, like, the baby's crying, here, here's an iPad, go look at a video, so that you're going to be distracted. So is there something as we as educators should be adding to this wild exposure? So does that sort of say, Liza, you want to, add to that question?
I think that's enough of a question. Earlier on, before we went live, started talking a little bit about time sharing and we were also talking about the user interface. So part of the reason I posed this question is because those are two things. It's like we don't have to time share anymore, and the user interfaces are really different. And I think there's something important about those the early disciplines we had to go through in order to get to do the computer to do anything we wanted it to do, that you don't have to go through today. But I want to hear what other people have to say. What do you guys think we should be doing, or should we be doing anything to introduce either computational thinking or computer use, or immunize people against being taken over influenced by ChatGPT? I mean, there's a whole lot of negative things that are happening. that as educators, we're the ones that have the most experience in this field. Maybe we should be thinking about this.
Could I
Go ahead.
say that the whole history of what we've been doing is the computer has always been something that's been open to all sorts of uses, good and bad. And at all points in time, the uses that we would consider quote unquote bad have outnumbered the uses that we would consider quote unquote good. So, I think that our role as educators should be focusing in on the positive uses of the stuff. Right. And we could wish the negative uses of the stuff to go away, but that didn't happen 10 years ago, and it didn't happen 20 years ago, and it didn't even happen 40 years ago. So, I think that Seymour wrote in a paper way back in the late 60s that our goal is to get kids to find more interesting things to do and find more interesting ways to talk about it. And I think that's as true now as it was then. And it's sort of the fact that a lot of this technology is because that kids are growing up with it. It may, if you wanted to take a very positive view, maybe it's a little bit overly optimistic view. It means that we don't have, back in the early days, we had to go through and explain how to use the backspace key and, how to push the mouse around. And these days you could do UIs the kids just fall into. That doesn't make it any easier to find uses for kids to use with computers where they're building things.
Margaret, you want to have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my viewpoint has been for a long time in my area of online teaching has been that some kids are too young for it. That's why in my teaching and in the design of my school, I went for the high school level, maybe upper middle school, depending on, the maturity of the student, and adult. But what I'm finding, and what I do, I have grandchildren who homeschool, and so I teach them. And what I'm finding, these are kids who are, 13, 14, 12, middle school and starting high school. And I have to teach them remotely because they don't live near where I am. Anyway, what I'm finding is that the kids these days, because they're so savvy with the technology is making the learning so easy for them. It's almost doing it for them. For example, something as simple as, and my area is English primarily, teaching the dictionary skills. All right, let's look at these words. What do these words mean? We're studying, let's say we're studying American history, and they're using words that we have got no idea what they are. So let's look up these words. Or in an English class, is this a verb or is this a noun? And what's the definition? The kids, the first thing that they want to do is just type it in online and let the computer do the search for them, which is fine and dandy if you're in a big hurry and you got to move on with something. But what I'm trying to teach them to do, and I presume that other kids are like this too, I'm trying to teach them to take the time to open up the book, open up the dictionary, and let's go through and try to find this word. And what that does is it makes you think about, okay, how does the alphabet work? Does this letter come before that letter or after that letter? Something as simple as that, the kids are not getting because the computer's doing it for them.
Yes.
So that's something that I think that going forward, I don't know if it's ever going to change, but I think that that's something that we have to, as teachers, be cautious about. And we have to teach them how to do things manually, let's put it that way, things that make their minds figure it out.
All right, I agree with that.
I'd like to disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
I think maybe a dictionary with hard copy is obsolete. And who cares?
That's the attitude. Yeah.
Well, that's my attitude too. I'm not, I mean,
But but if you have the computer do all the thinking for you,
it's not
aren't you
doing the
missing?
thinking for me. I'm looking up a word to find out its meaning. The computer isn't hardwiring it in my brain. So I can type it in. And if I type it in correctly, I get something else. If I and I have to recognize that it's almost the same. Feet, F-E-A-T, F-E-E-T.
That's another thing, spelling.
Well,
The
but
automatic spell,
but you
the
learn-
automatic spell
But
checkers.
not if I'm searching for a word, not if I'm doing what you just told me.
Right, I see what you're
And-
saying, but
And
you're reminding me
I
of
just
another.
think, throw the book away. Okay,
Think-
there are, it's like the kind of I will probably absorb that, what you want me to do, in a different way. My problem solving abilities will increase. Yeah, Brian, take over.
I was going to actually take a step back and say this is actually a really interesting debate because
Yes.
there are two points of views, and I think there are 2 points of views that it's important for educators and the educational community to take seriously. What Cynthia is saying, at the moment that the machine could do something automatic, maybe that by definition makes it something that it isn't worth a lot of attention for kids to learn. Margaret, you're saying you
What
shouldn't
about, yeah,
throw it away.
that's just one, that's
Yeah,
one
you should-
example, but other example is spelling, where you've got the automatic spell completion, and the kids, you see these words, and the computer, the word processor puts in a word which is correct spelling, but for the wrong word.
Well, so
And the teacher I'm just saying that the teachers in the classrooms need to be aware of this and make sure that the students are understanding the differences between words and not just relying on the intelligence of the computer.
let me absolutely agree with you, but this is another case
I agree too with that.
it's not a new problem. We went through this and it was long enough ago that we can actually do a postmortem analysis. Is the transition from the pre-calculator age to the with calculator age. That when calculators were first being introduced, there were many math educators saying, but if they're not doing it by hand, they're not getting it.
Yes.
Now that we're 20 some years later, maybe even 30 some years later, math educators aren't saying that anymore. So it is very important that during the transition phase, when a new technology starts doing something that you had to do by hand before, a friend of mine used to like saying, with new technology, you've got to ask 2 questions. What's gained? What's lost? Now, the answer to the what's lost question is almost never nothing. The things will get lost. The question is what gets gained, whether or not what gets gained is bigger than that. Now, it's interesting that you say spelling. I'll have to admit, I never got it. And I felt really bad about it until I got into my 20s. And then realized that several of my friends who publish books don't know how to spell either. What they used to do is, if you really had a message to get out, what was important was not stringing letters into words. What was important was stringing words into ideas. And I knew many people that were extremely good at stringing words into ideas, and they left the stringing letters into words to a copy editor. Now,
Well, when you're in elementary school though, and you have teachers who say, okay, we're gonna learn, I'm gonna be teaching you writing and vocabulary, we're gonna learn vocabulary. Just write these words the way that you think that they sound. Well, we're not gonna worry about correct spelling. So do you think that that's how the student should be taught?
that's it's funny though, because you're pointing to a really hot debate. And for us to get into it, I'll get myself into trouble, but I'll risk getting myself into trouble. My daughter went to a French immersion school. And at that French immersion school, the prevailing thought was the English side thought it was whole word, and the French side thought it was phonics. Okay, so my daughter went through both. I think my conclusion at the end of it is asking which of those is better. I think depends on which kid it is. I'd be happy to say that let's put down the swords and say there are kids for whom one approach is better, and there are kids for whom the other approach is better. That's a little bit different question. It was true for my own children that they did learn how to read before they knew how to spell, and they learned how to read and they learned how to write. One of them eventually caught up in spelling. And the thing about it is if it's the case where I think I do agree with whole language, getting kids reading is crucially important. And the argument on the whole language side is, do you want to gatekeep learning how to read by learning how to spell? I'd say no. Now, you weren't suggesting that. You were suggesting essentially on the writing side.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, and the kids that I saw who were outside of the debate and were just being kids, they tended to write, not just writing anything down. The extreme form of just write anything down. I know I was way happier being able to express myself and having a mechanical system take care of getting the spelling right. And
I think we have to step back even further one step and ask, with whatever skill we're talking about teaching, why is that skill important?
That's
for
right.
people today?
Agreed.
And if we look at early computing, one of the reasons spelling was important was because the computer was too stupid to understand what you said if you misspelled it. Or if you put in, you talked about Lisp, if you put in an extra parentheses, you're dead in the water. So if what we do with kids today and adults is say, is this a skill you need? And if they say no, then the teacher's job, and this is coming from somebody who's a Montessori enthusiast, is to set up an environment where that skill is needed. So the computing environment, the early computing environment, was a skill where it's needed. Today's computing environment, for the most part, it isn't. But if your first graders you write something and they don't spell adequately, and they ask their classmates to read what they wrote, they won't be able to read it, decode it either.
Well,
So,
they write it the way that it sounds, which you can't
spelled right or not. Why is spelling important if what you write is decodable? The computer couldn't decode stuff if you spelled it wrong. If you spelled print, P-I-N-T, it wouldn't.
That's right. Yeah, you get your syntax error.
Right. So the motivation that the learner has is the motivation to communicate. If you start with that, then if spelling helps you communicate, great. Then I'll learn to spell even though I hate it, so that I can communicate. If I've got a computer friend, colleague that will spell things for me, I don't need it for communication. So why do I need to spell? But when the electricity goes down, you don't have that help, and you may have to use a paper and pencil, and you may have to be able to distinguish between FEAT and FEET.
But this is all part of revising what needs to be taught.
Exactly.
And everything that Margaret said, it's another way of looking at it. So taking in what you say, Liza, which is, what is it that you think is important?
Mhm.
And how do you build
what the learner thinks is important?
well,
So does that mean that
you as the learner, teachers have to be learners? And
is this where education is going, though? That basically anything goes?
I think education is going out of the schools because the schools were designed to be funnels to get, I mean, we talk about lectures to get book learning into the heads of the next generation. And we don't need it anymore.
Well,
What do we need?
we've been saying for years, school is going to disappear. It doesn't.
No, but we,
But the kind of activities that go on in school do change. And I think this is such an important thing that Margaret brings up.
Mhm.
It is the same kind of discussion as the math world had and still has. And it's wonderful to have that discussion. I just think that's what researchers and people who have been teaching for a while need to think, how do we change? How do we accommodate the new tools to make it easier for children to accomplish what they need to accomplish?
And it doesn't even have to be children at all, that's also adults.
Yeah, well, for me, it's the same as children, but sorry.
Yeah, Eric, could I have a go at because Margaret, one of the question that was on the question list that we're not going to have time to get to is what did we find frustrating about this? One of the things that when we were trying to get Logo out in the world is people took a project-centered approach as meaning anything goes. It meant the opposite. That we were going on when it was the role of the teacher to keep the projects within the scope of intellectually meaningful. It
Mhm.
wasn't free for all. It was the opposite of free for all.
How does a teacher do that?
It's hard. And I think that was one of the failings of Logo, is to be a Logo teacher is hard. And the reason that it's hard is if you're following the curriculum in a standard way, almost by design, what's being taught is the easily measurable. Right?
Mhm.
If spelling is easily measurable. You know, back when we were doing pre-calculator arithmetic, it was easily measurable. In order to evaluate what's going on in a Logo classroom, it's not easily measurable. You need the same measurement criteria that are typically used in kindergarten and graduate schools, which is people who understand the domain are actually watching what's happening and making some judgments. And it's funny though, because it's the opposite of easily measurable is not anything goes. The opposite of easily measurable is something that's hard to measure. And that hard to measure, I think, is an important piece of education.
And one of the things we often don't measure that some of my projects are looking at is the satisfaction of the learner as compared with the satisfaction of the school district or the parents or the teacher. It's like when learners are really satisfied and happy with what they're learning, it's fun and they like it, even if it's, as Seymour said, hard fun. And they'll work hard to learn what they're intrinsically motivated to do. And that's why these are the early personal computers ended up in classrooms, because the kids loved them. They'd do almost anything to get a turn on the computer.
You know, but there was a property of the early computers in classrooms that we lived through that we haven't had it since then. Teachers were actually allowing themselves to expose their learning to for the kids to watch. And, you know, the kids were role models for children. In general, during the early Logo days, the kids could see their teachers learning. They could see their teachers trying things and even failing. And, you know, so what did you do is you just worked through it as a group.
Uh-huh.
You know, which kind of, it went away once everybody started understanding, and it was only the kids that were learning.
Well, if teachers aren't learning, then the classroom isn't working, as far as I'm concerned. But one of the early things that Bob Albrecht didn't try to introduce the computer into the classroom. He put the computer in the teacher's lounge. So the teachers didn't have to start their learning in front of the students. And so once they got a chance to play with the computer a little bit in the teacher's lounge, and they learn to expose their lack of knowledge to their fellow teachers and to ask for help and to let their peers teach them, then many of the teachers who had said, no, I can't put a computer in my classroom because I don't know how to use it, were more willing to expose their learning, as you pointed out, to the class, and the whole class, young and old, became a learning experience, a learning context, rather than this funnel approach of the teacher knows it and the teacher's gonna dump it into the students. But this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because there's a lot for us to be talking about and sharing with other practitioners today. And we have to change our content.
This is the core. What Margaret brought up and what we're talking about is the core of education and of the changing of what computers can contribute or magnify.
Mm-hmm. So yes, they can spell for kids who might want to learn to spell, but what else can they do for us? How can they
what I find
rather than just doing it for us, as Margaret said?
Well, yeah, what I find kind of disturbing is that with the AI that's coming in now, more and more, you're going to have the computer writing papers for the students, which takes away the students who don't want to think or do it will just say, okay, let me just put in my my parameters here and let the computer write the paper. And it's like, I find that disturbing. I find that because it can harm the student, because the student is not learning to analyze, pull a topic apart, research it, pull it apart, and then synthesize it and bring it back to, compose their own essay on this and present it. They're missing out on that if they can just have the computer do it for them. And how does the classroom teacher monitor that? How does the classroom teacher know?
Have you used any of the chat bot things? Because
No.
I think you have a very different view if you tried using one. I found it kind of exciting and challenging. For I didn't think of the computer as teaching me so much as me trying to teach the computer, and to sort of press it to do better. Now, Brian has done more thinking about this, and I don't know why he's so silent.
Because this is a good conversation, actually. Could I share the concern? Okay, but let me share the concern and try to point out that, again, I was saying earlier that maybe I'm an optimist by nature. Everything that you're pointing out may be half empty. I don't think that means that there isn't a half full. I do think as educators, and we were talking about the past, this is shifting to talking about the future. The recent advances in AI, I think, are the biggest challenges us ed tech people have seen in about 50 years. And the challenge has only really presented itself in the last less than a year, really. And to try and figure out what the right way to go in this, I think it's going to be pretty difficult. And we're unlikely to be able to get to a real conclusion today. Because with Margaret, one of the things, if I try to sum up the debate that you were having with Cynthia, there's a question of, if the machine could do it, why should you let the machine do it? Because you're losing something by not let the people do it. I found, for me personally, both as a learner and as a teacher, there was always something higher level to do. I actually found not having to calculate, not having to do long division as freeing. I really did. I actually started being comfortable with my writing post-word processor. Okay, because I found learning how to spell and cursive writing to be an incredible drag that I wasn't good at. Freed from that, rather than learning how to write letters on papers, instead, I was writing letters to friends, right? And just starting to, to work on pieces that were more better than that. And I kind of agree that if in fact there was something that we considered important that's turning to dust because the machines are doing it, the question we should be asking is, what's the higher level thing that could replace it? Because there always is something. It may be that, what's writing about really is it's about communicating thoughts. It's not about spelling, it's not about cursive writing. It's really about communicating ideas. And it may actually, the reverse from what you're suggesting may happen. It may be possible to get kids to communicate ideas younger than they could have otherwise, because a lot of the mechanical skills that used to be prerequisites are no longer prerequisites because the machine could take care of it. The thing that I'm certainly finding is these days computers are better than just calculators because they understand how to do algorithms. And I find that like thrilling, the opposite of scary, because, this next round may be a little bit scary because what ChatGPT is doing, we don't really understand. And the not understanding of it is a bit concerning, but it's too early to really know what's going on with that. But I think it is the case that educators have to understand that there's a challenge ahead and big things may change.
And actually, Margaret, when you were talking about the challenge for teachers, you used the word monitoring. How is the teacher going to monitor? And that's what the child quote writes. And that's very similar to Brian's point about a measurement. So how are we going to measure the quality of the essay? But that's a gloss over a number of different questions. How are we going to know whether it was a computer-generated essay or the actual student-generated essay? What did the student have to do in order to get the computer to generate that essay? So the real creative thinking, actually, I have played with ChatGPT quite a bit, and the real creative thinking comes in generating what they call the prompt, which is what you tell the computer to get the computer to put the output, to make the output. So the large language model becomes the black box. You have to put the right stuff in order to get the right stuff out.
Yeah, because one of the things, and it's again another example of something that when it first came out, people were worried that it would replace something that used to be an important skill, Google. Right? When Google first came out, people said, if you could just type in a question and get answers, then there's the whole researching at the library that vanishes. Right.
In some sense, it does, except that Google gives you
in some sense, it doesn't. So today, I turned out to be mentoring a bunch of high school students that want to do a project on photosynthesis. So I felt I had to refresh my memory about photosynthesis. So I typed into ChatGPT, what's the difference between photosystem 1 and photosystem 2? And it gave a really good response. Photosystem 1 basically produces ATP and photosystem 2 produces NADPH. So I typed in, what's the relationship between ATP and NADPH and photosynthesis? And I got 2 pages of the exact right stuff in 5 seconds. And I have a hard time not seeing some positive in that.
But what I did, my first experience with ChatGPT, Mike, was I asked it to do something with turtle geometry. Of that, of course, I knew very well. And it fumbled around, and I had to give it some more information and coax it. And then, of course, it came to a conclusion that was wrong. And what I loved is how it thanked me every time I corrected it. It really made me feel great. And I loved having...
Did it make it smarter?
Well, I loved having... I'm a loner. and I loved having the conversation with somebody. It was very reassuring. And when I finally told it was wrong, and it's very politely, thanked me yet again, one, I went away realizing that ChatGPT needs to be watched.
Absolutely.
And this is, I put it as an example of how it could evolve. But I really liked the give and take, the improvement, yeah, you did that, but could you make it better in this way? And there was a whole dialogue. In fact, what would be good is if young people were using this, you'd like to see their dialogue. It gets saved.
But
It's
But
not
to
the
get-
final essay that's important.
it's not the
prompt
final.
response, prompt
Not the
response.
dialogue that's important. No.
I have friends who are graduate students who don't speak English as a first language. So when they're writing an essay, it comes out as if it was written by somebody who doesn't speak English as a first language. They give it to ChatGPT and it comes out as if it was written by somebody who does speak English as first language.
A very conservative, uncreative person who speaks English. It is a statistical model.
It's
give you
funny
the
though.
statistical-
It's funny though. It writes well, but it has no idea what it should be writing about.
Exactly. Has no
Right.
idea.
And this is kind of like spell check on steroids.
Yep.
And it's a question, maybe it's a question for Margaret. Should we just pretend it doesn't exist? Or should we figure out how to roll with it?
Well, and that's
creative.
And when I'm just thinking about the future of technology and education and the classroom teachers. And that's something, that's just something that they will have to wrangle with. How to assess, what kind of assessments are they going to use going forward? Maybe
They
not
is you.
now, but
They is you. You have to help solve this problem of how do you evaluate the experience.
But one of the things you have to do is you have to be familiar enough with the way that
Yeah.
large language models put language together so that you can recognize it when you're reading something that's created by one of them. It isn't hard to do. And the other side of that, let me finish this particular point. The other side of that is that you have to demand that your students put out something that's creative rather than something that's conventional. It's a statistical model. It will come out with the most conventional response, which may or may not be accurate as possible. And if you are only asking that your students go that far, then a computer can do as well. But if you're asking them to go the extra mile, as Brian is talking about, then the teacher is really demanding something creative from the student, and the large language model can't do it.
What I was going to say was, it's very, very interesting because another huge challenge we had since the beginning of Logo was how to evaluate it. And it's been a big mess. There's no good answer. That there have been various things that we've tried to evaluate. Sometimes people would try to evaluate it by saying, so they did the Logo class and then did they score better on the usual standardized tests, right? Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes the answer was no. Seymour would say, and he couldn't get away with it, he wasn't really in that community directly, it's the tests that aren't really testing the things that are really important. And it's funny though, because I have some sympathy for that viewpoint, because if I just looked at some of the things that I'd learned, one of the things that the tests aren't testing is what effect is this going to have on you 10 years later? And a lot of my best educational experiences were like sleeper cells in the back of my head that only popped up way, way, way after I took the relevant tests. And this is coming up in the context of GPT, is any kind of project-based education has always been really, really hard to figure out what appropriate evaluation is. What's being pointed out now is because of ChatGPT, the evaluation question is getting harder. Yeah, true. The evaluation question was hard even prior to this. And the evaluation question was especially hard as the things kids were working on got more and more open-ended.
Have we lost Jeff? Because we're having
Yeah,
a great
we're-
conversation and we're way over time.
No, you didn't lose me. I just stepped aside because it made it look better. We got the four of you. And
Okay.
this is exactly what, I had hoped would happen. So a lot of this is new for me, is as having a group of people that have similar backgrounds and interests within vintage computers. And so I think this worked out well. You had people actually disagree, but they respectfully disagreed, but he had a lot of different viewpoints. So, I had a whole list of questions to ask, but this really worked well. So I'm thinking like in the future, we could just have like one topic and start with that topic, because we sort of delved into a lot of different topics that I was going to go to
I think that's your conclusion, Jeff. I think if we hadn't had a whole list of questions, that it might not have gone so well. It's the best thing is when you have a whole list of questions and you don't need them. If you don't have them and you do need them, you're really up a creek.
I have a question for Liza, which is, I want to know if you can easily teach how to recognize a ChatGPT result or a written thing by me.
That's an empirical question, and I'd be happy to participate in the experiment to find out the answer.
But I thought you said it was easy to do. I thought you told me, I heard, and that's why I'm.
What I said, it's easy to do. Yeah, I have to translate that into it's easy for me to do. And I don't know whether it's easy to teach or not.
Yeah, could I try to guess what you said, or maybe this is repeating what you said?
No,
If it was written by a person, you'd find at least one clever turn of phrase.
Probably true.
Yeah, where the thing that you're saying is it writes nicely, but in a mundane, very,
But I do that often. I write mundane, and you're going to tell me whether it's me or CB. All right, it's another argument.
There's no English mistakes in the ChatGPT.
And it's also there's limited.
There are no English mistakes in my mundane writing.
Well,
my experiential writing, there is. But
Cynthia, could I throw the question back a little bit?
Yes.
If you read an anonymous piece written by Seymour, you'd know it was written by Seymour.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you probably, it may even be true of me, that if you read an anonymous thing written by me, you'd probably be able to guess that it was written by me. So it's a similar question, is if you read something written by the nobody, it'll be of the style of nobody.
Well, you certainly couldn't tell from my page. Oh, well, maybe you could.
I think you could.
If you're familiar with the style of the writing of the person, then you're likely to be able to tell the difference. But if you don't know the person at all, then you might never know.
Mm-hmm.
So
but this is why. Oh, go on, Liza.
If you know ChatGPT, its writing is very, very regular and repeatable. It doesn't matter who's giving it the prompts. The essays have the same structure. They have the same styles, many of them, not all of them. And so there are recognizable clues just there as there are with artists or with musicians. You can hear the first 10 bars of a piece of classical music and often recognize who you don't think so? I said it was a question.
Excuse me, if it's a collaboration, you can't tell. I have a friend that sends her writing to ChatGPT after she's finished writing it, and it makes it better.
I didn't say it wasn't better. I said you can tell the ChatGPT.
You can't tell. I can't tell that it isn't her.
Okay.
But
Maybe I'm not
if you've got a magic, so that's why I want to know if you can tell me how I can tell that.
Give me 10 pieces of her writing that hasn't been reworked by ChatGPT, 10 pieces of her writing that has been reworked by ChatGPT, and
Oh.
10 pieces of writing on the same topic that ChatGPT did. And I might be able to answer your question, but although I've played with it a lot, I haven't put in the requisite 10,000 hours. I'm not an expert.
It's funny though, because what Cynthia said about her uses of ChatGPT is the thing that I kind of think is where it's likely to land in a good way in education is being an informed conversation partner. Right, because I know several people, not just Cynthia, that said when they feel like brainstorming, rather they just brainstorm with ChatGPT. They ignore everything that it says, but occasionally it'll say something that causes thinking to go down a path that they hadn't been going down before.
So,
Right.
yeah, my opinion is ChatGPT is good for specific things. There are certain things that it's really not good at, and it'll like for example, we've had people write something about computer history, and it'll draw upon different sources and make something up, and there's errors, lots and lots of errors. But it's good for certain things. I've heard people it's good for certain coding that it's good for. I've used it to make lesson plans, which is like sort of like a static thing. It's not that much creative, and a rubric. So it's good for certain things, and it's not so good at other things. Is what my observation is.
It's good for algorithmic tasks. They can use a fixed corpus of training data. If
All
it
right,
has
so we are up to we're past an hour now. We can keep going on this topic. We can go to another topic. do have one question from the chat, from the YouTube chat. So what are your feelings, Brian, Cynthia, so far? You want to continue with like just answer this question and then end the talk, and then we can always schedule another talk at another time. So what do you think so far, Brian?
You're the host.
I'm the host, Cynthia.
Oh, I want to know what Margaret thinks. I have this I cut her off, and I apologize.
All right, so let's continue and finish this topic, and I will ask the one question after we can have Margaret, and then we'll end this talk. And then what my plan is to have another talk with us again, because I think it worked well at a future time. So what do you want to respond, Margaret?
I agree with what you just suggested.
Okay. All right, good.
maybe if we put the video of this on the channel and ask people to put in the comments if they want to have another one or not, if they would like to attend another one.
All right, so that's a good idea. So it is live stream, so it will be recorded. So once we end this, it'll be there for people to see. So we did have viewers, actually. So I'm looking at the statistics. We do have viewers. We have a certain number of views. I don't know if you want me to tell you exactly how many, but live views are one thing, but then afterwards is a different thing. So then people will go back afterwards when they have time and watch it. And it's a good time because I've been scheduling the talks at 6:30, like the pre-recorded ones, for example, and then the live ones at 6:30. So usually you'll start to see it uptick like within 24 hours later. So that's a good point. So let me just ask the one question that someone asked, and then we will conclude it. So their question that they asked is it important for every child to learn to code? And I'll start with Brian.
It didn't sound like a trick question. I think it's a trick question. I think it is one of the things that we found, especially in recent years, is there's a conflation between learning how to code as a project building skill and learning how to code as a future job skill. Now, learning how to code as a future job skill is probably no more or less important than any other technical skill. learning how to code is something that you could use as a material for project building is something that I think would be good. That said, the whole idea of what learning how to code means is yet another thing that I think these large language models are going to upset.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Cynthia, what do you think? Is it important for every child to learn to code? I could come back to you if you want to think about it for a little bit.
The question, I don't like the question.
Or answer the question that you want to answer, then change the question to make it fit what you want to answer.
I think that designing, implementing, debugging are such important elements. And if learning to code is how you do it, you could certainly do it by writing. But then how do you debug? Well, you have to have some knowledge about it. The thing about using a computer in a, I think it depends on the environment. I mean,
Okay.
I'm very sold on doing things with the turtle. It's a creature I can talk to and I can debug and I can think about how, if I were a turtle, how I would be. Learning to code for its own sake, no, I don't think every child should, but I think there's an experience of what debugging is, of the faulty idea we have that errors are bad. It gets erased. Anyway, that's
so that's in line with what I teach in general. Is it's okay to make mistakes and that you learn.
We call them bugs.
Yes,
and
bugs.
it already takes away a lot of negativity.
Yes.
But negative thinking is not bad. It's just you need to be on top of it.
All right. Good answer. Margaret, what do you think?
Well, it depends on the age. I wouldn't, I don't know. I think it is important that children understand that the computer just doesn't magically do stuff, but that there's coding that goes on that makes it happen. And if we can teach them on a very elementary level that concept, and they can learn just elementary commands that will make the computer do something, it will be very helpful to them. And that whole aspect of making mistakes and fixing them, I think that's a valuable tool for them to be learning about the computer, but not at too early of an age.
Yes, I think in terms of the age, it has to be appropriate level for the age, simpler coding ideas. And I think you're also saying that in general, it's a skill that they should have exposures to. Like, for example, you learn in high school, like calculus and trigonometry. You're not going to use that the rest of your life. But the point is teaching you how to think, how to problem solve. So coding can also help you to understand how computers work and have exposure of it. And so at least you have a fundamental understanding. Whether you want to go into the coding after that, that's a different story. So that's sort of see what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Liza, what do you think?
I always have more thoughts than there's time to express, which is actually an act of encoding. So if what we're talking about is learning to encode our concepts into some sort of symbolic language, including or semantic language, absolutely, we all need to learn to encode. I don't think we all need to become computer programmers, except that we all, as voters and consumers of computer output, need to understand the GIGO concept, garbage in, garbage out. And one of the most effective ways of bringing that home to young and old learners is having them have the experience of coding some garbage into the computer and having it spit it out as if it were infallible. So once they learn that whoever it is, young or old, that you can make a computer lie to somebody else and the other person is some likelihood of believing it, that serves as an inoculation against a lot of the things that make us afraid of what's going on today. So in that sense, absolutely, everybody should learn enough coding to do that. And then some people are going to make a living doing symbolic problem solving. Everybody has to learn to solve problems, but not everybody is going to be using the computer language tools in order to solve the problems that they face. So for some people, that's really important. Everybody should have the option of learning that. But actually, given how fast we are developing automatic computer coding, I find in the industry that finding people who understand how to build a satisfactory user experience is much more difficult than finding people who can code some problem that we know how to solve into a computer so the computer can solve it 100,000 times very fast. So the answer, the obvious answer to the question is, for me, is no, not everybody needs how to learn computer code, computer programming. Does everybody need to learn garbage in, garbage out? Yes. And that's one easy way to learn it.
All right. Thank you. Brian, wanted to say something?
No.
All right. So let's have a wrap it up and we'll have final thoughts. How did you think that this conversation goes, or any other final thoughts, Brian?
I thought it was great fun. Yeah, thank you to everybody else here.
Good. Glad to hear that. Cynthia?
I agree with what Brian just said. I thought it was fun, and I was really delighted with Margaret and Liza, and would like to follow on. I mean, Brian and I have had discussions in the past.
So you're used to talking to each other a lot, but it's good to have new people involved with it.
Well, I don't know about yes.
Well, we've talked to him a lot over the years, and it's good to have other viewpoints.
Well, they might be the same viewpoints. It's just nice to have more people.
All right, sounds good. Margaret.
Yeah, I enjoyed meeting you all. It's nice to see some of the old timers. In my field of education, which has been online education, I haven't interacted a lot in person. Well, I know we're not in person here, but still, I've been kind of like in my own realm. And so this has been enjoyable. Thanks.
All right, Liza.
Well, when we were in college, we used to have these all-night bull sessions where we sat around and we talked and argued, and these Zoom sessions give us an opportunity to do that. And so for me, it's great fun. That's why I wanted to do it in the first place. I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
So, but and I also want to have a chance to bring some more people in. But just these 4 people, I mean, we could probably talk for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And we find a few places where we agreed to disagree. We came down to different points of view and a whole lot of points of convergence, and maybe even some creative ideas we could share with the wider audience. And I think all of that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and it's definitely given me some ideas for different topics for next time. So, but we can put it to YouTube to see if there's any comments as to whether they want to see more of this. But we could also just schedule it ourselves, like when we want to do a follow-up. And I have some different topics that we can sort of start with. I have some ideas based on what we're talking about. So I also agree this went well. This was exactly what I had hoped it to be, some interaction. And this is sometimes it's a follow-up to, the VCFE's talks, but it's interaction is really good, casual, informal interaction. It's a lot more fun.
If it strays out of the VCF wheelhouse and you don't want to host it anymore, we can always move it to Open Portal Network, because this is exactly what Open Portal Network is for. So we don't have to stop, even if VCF wants to stop.
Yeah. I did see comments. Someone just said I'd love to see another one of these. There's lots of comments. I don't know if all these comments will be preserved when I end it, but there's been a lot of comments here. So we did have a few watchers
Well, before you turn off the
there.
recording,
Yeah.
we can all leave and you can just read all the comments and then they'll be preserved.
Okay. Sure. So, all right. So I'm going to end the live stream. I can continue recording on the Zoom. So I'm going to end